Does Steve think Nick can win the Olympia? Nick Walker.
He'd have a hard time. His hands are full. Can't underestimate him, but his shape is needs work. He's got a rough road ahead of him, honestly.
Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. So everyone is against Nick Walker now, and it's not hard to see why. Regardless of reasons, he has not attended the past two Olympias, and the one showing we got out of him recently was a pretty poor one by his own standard. Not to mention, bodybuilding as a whole is moving away from this type of physique to a more aesthetic era. And now the head judge of the Olympia is saying the quiet part out loud. You saw in the clip at the beginning, Steve Weinberger quite literally said Nick is probably not going to win the Olympia, just in a nicer roundabout way. Well, hold on. Would Nick not be already knocking on the door of top 3 at this year's Olympia? He beat Martin Fitzwater at this year's New York Pro, and Martin was 4th at the Olympia. So wouldn't that mean if Nick just brought his New York Pro version, which wasn't even that good, he should still be able to get top 4 on paper? Well, let's revisit this matchup of Martin versus Nick. It was already really close to the New York Pro, and now that we have the context of the Mr. Olympia, and now that we know how it played out, we can provide some new context to this rematch and how it might have went if they faced off on the Olympia stage. And based on this comparison and its results, we'll be able to infer a lot of things about Nick Walker, the shifting judging criteria at the Olympia, and where the two meet. One of the biggest questions this year, now becoming an annual thing, is where would Nick Walker have placed at this year's Mr. Olympia? Of course, we're assuming that his body didn't shut down and wasn't ran to the ground by a coach. So let's try to get a more objective, more accurate answer to this question, and more questions by comparing Nick Walker with his 2024 New York Pro package to Martin Fitzwater and his 2024 Mr. Olympia package. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. The front double was once a knockout shot for Nick Walker. No one had arms like that, no one still does. Even though I don't think he has the best arms in this era currently, there's no denying how good they are, and how unique they are with that grainy hardness and those mountainous peaks. However, I was never fully sold on this pose, and it has nothing to do with his body parts and the arms, and it has everything to do with his proportions. He looks like a toad when he crunches down on his abs. Even though they're actually terrific, at least they were, now he's not even crunching down on them as much because he can't, and I still don't like the look. The short legs, wide waist combo is so awkward. But let's be honest, he beats Martin in pretty much everything. The arms are no question since Martin's have been kind of weak, and Nick's are some of the best ever. In the lats, I prefer Nick as well, who surprisingly has really wide ones. And in the legs, Martin wins, but just by themselves without looking at the rest of the physique, Nick's are actually pretty good. They're very developed and very separated, and when you don't look at them in comparison to that wide waist, the sweeps really aren't that big of an issue. However, we can't just look at the legs in a vacuum. When combined with the rest of the physique, Martin beats him easily because his are just massive and actually fit his upper body. However, this pose is not all about the body parts, more so than other poses. What I consider to be more important in this particular pose is the waistline and a competitor's X-frame proportions. And there is absolutely no discussion to be had. Nick may have great body parts, but put them together around his wide waist, and it's an awkward look. I personally would say it's a bad look. And for Martin, he has one of the best X-frames for the space he occupies right now. He's cut from the same cloth as a Hottie, Derek, Nick, those type of guys. He's around the same height, but a little bit taller than all of them. But you know what I mean, he's not exactly like a Samson or Andrew who really bring shape first, then size. The first guys I mentioned are more like your typical bodybuilder. But Martin is kind of occupying both avenues. He's very thickly developed and has a good amount of size and completeness, but that X-frame and the shape is pretty great too. He has those flaring lats and a small waist that make a perfect V, and his quads rounded out for a nice overall X-frame. To me, that's what this pose is all about. Nick wins all the body parts except the legs, yes, but Martin is no slouch in anything, and he schools Nick on shape. I know a lot of fans out there will say Nick wins this one because he's a freaky mass monster, and there will be times I lean into that argument, but here that's just not as applicable. With the shape, waistline, and complete physique, Martin takes this one. Just with one out of the 3 possible points though. I'm going to cut Nick some slack even though I don't really see it here myself. I still know a lot of guys will go with Nick because he is a freak. So we'll make it a narrow 1-point win here in my system for Martin. I may have had highlights to say about both of them in the last pose, and I think we can all agree that there are good things about either of them in the last pose, even if we disagree on the winner. But the front lat spread is reprehensible for both. It's probably just completely unsalvageable for Nick, like how do you even fix something like this? The funny thing is, the lats are actually good. We saw that in the last pose and he maintains that here. In fact, he has better lats than Martin. At least the more visible lats, which does mean better. It is about what you can present after all. However, I'm not going to give him the pose. I don't believe I ever have given the front lat spread spread to Nick using any version. His structure makes this one very hard to pull off. And then add a bloated stomach in there and Nick looks like a tick ready to pop. So Martin gets the win here by default. However, he is still mediocre himself, and it's only because of posing. His lats are good and he has a good X-frame, but he doesn't open up in this one. I don't really care why either, it's not an excuse. I desperately want him to fix this right now because he's DOA against everyone else with a half decent pose here. Filling in this gap would really help him a lot. He doesn't even really win here, Nick just loses more. So I'm going to hold my nose and give Martin the smallest possible margin here. Thankfully, the side chest is back to full form for each gentleman. This is one of their best poses. First off, they both start with a firm foundation. Martin has that very full side leg with plenty of ham drop, but Nick just brute forces his way past Martin with a similar sized side leg, but one that's much more detailed. Then upstairs in the upper limb, Martin starts out winning the delt since his doesn't flatten out as much as Nick's, and he has more striations. I'd honestly give Martin the arm too. His shorter insertions make the arm look thicker from the side. I don't really think Nick's doing himself any favors by lifting up his elbow and allowing his arm to flatten out even more. He still has some good tricep definition though. And finally, in the pecs, this is a pretty easy call if I'm being honest. It's Martin. The problem with Nick's chest is that it's small genetically. It takes up less surface area on his body. Martin looks more impressive from the get-go because he has the bigger chest on his own frame comparatively. And then he is just as developed as Nick. He has very full pecs, good pec height on the far one, and better striations than Nick. I will give Nick the edge in overall muscularity. He looks a little toad-like yet again, but in this pose it works because you want to see him as muscular as possible. That's what this pose is all about. But Martin's execution has a little classic flair to it. His waist is sunken in, he's keeping it in check, and he has that prominent chest shelf. So from the overall perspective, looking at these guys top to bottom at the same time, Martin brings something different but very welcome to this comparison. Overall, I still think it's a close pose because Nick won the lower half and is a tank, but Martin has the better pecs and that puts him over the edge. Just barely though. We're going to stick with the trend of 1-point wins for now. Now this surprised me. I've always said Nick Walker, even though he's a talker and maybe has a few stalkers, usually has a lot to offer here in the rear double. Up until 2024, this was the second best back out there next to Derek Lunsford. Nowadays, I'm not so sure. We may need to re-examine that claim sooner than later. Take a look at this matchup for example. Martin is actually really pushing Nick here. First off, these are the two best lower bodies out there for this pose. Some people may have sharper glutes like Derek Lunsford for example, but when you include everything, quad sweep, hams, glutes, these guys are the best of today. You can just really take your pick here. Martin has the better quad sweeps and the cleaner lines than the glutes, but Nick has those incredibly thick hamstrings. They're like power cables. For my money, I'd go with Martin for a very, very slight lead, just because he has the best showings in all three elements when averaged together, at least in my opinion. In the back though, Nick has lost ground. Like I said, this one has seen better days. I'm not saying it's bad now, but he used to be denser, thicker, more detailed, and much grainier and harder. He has the better lats than Martin for sure, and the thinner skin, but Martin looks really thick through the upper back and a little more detailed. Nick still picks off the upper limbs though with those bicep peaks and Martin's weird lack of separation in the delts. Overall, I can't believe I'm saying it, but I'm leaning slightly towards Martin here. But let's take a look at the next back pose so we can get a more encompassing view of these steamy back shots. And the rear lat spread is still really close. Once again in the lower body, it's pretty much 50-50, but once again, I'll take Martin. In the back though, Martin is really thick and detailed, but Nick once again has the better lats. He has the fuller lats top to bottom, which is more appealing to me. I could really go either way on this one too, so I'm going to do the Project Bodybuilding Special. I'm giving each guy one back pose apiece, each with a 1-point win. This does cancel these two poses out, but they're both good and pretty much even when everything is averaged together, so really, I think that's fair. That is an accurate portrayal of what's going on anyway. Overall, I'd say Nick maybe has the slightly stronger back poses, but that's very tough to say. It would be like a 52-48 thing. Statistically, this is still basically a 50-50 all around. Some of you may know my opinion on the side triceps as a whole. If you don't, I currently think Nick Walker has the best side tricep pose in the world. I think he's better than Crizzo, Hottie, Hunter, all of them. However, Martin is a really big up-and-comer in this one. He has a great pose, but against Nick, he still needs more. Like in the side leg, Martin is very big, very full, and has that fresh 3D look, but Nick is just as massive but has way more detail throughout every part of the leg, so he wins there. In the midsection, Martin is once okay, pretty good. I wish he'd hit it a little more upright so he doesn't have that small stomach protrusion in the lower stomach area, but this is still a good midsection. However, Nick can actually really lock the stomach in this shot, and his abs are way more defined and developed compared to Martin's. It's crazy to say because Martin's midsection is great, but Nick's is even better in this shot, and yet again, he wins. Then in the pecs, I want to go with Martin. He has more detail, but I hate the way he lets his chest cave in and look sad. Nick doesn't have the most detailed pecs, but he has a very square look to the chest overall, and I want a nice proud looking chest shelf sitting on top of those abs, which is provided by Nick Walker in this shot. So as a whole, I think he at least wins these these torso elements when they're combined, even if Martin picks the pecs off on their own. And finally in the tricep, Nick is plainly carrying more mass, winning this area. Martin has a tricep and an overall pose that beats the vast majority of competitors in the league, but Nick is literally one of the only few that can beat Martin here. With that said, Martin's pose is a strong one, so once again I find it hard not to make this a 1-point win. Martin is still great everywhere, but Nick is just a little better in each area. I think if there's an argument to make any pose worth 2 points for the winner, out of the poses we've done so far, here would be the strongest. Now here in the abs and thighs, if you want to do a 2-point win, that is more than okay. In fact, I don't think that goes far enough. I've always defended Nick's abs and thighs as a very strong pose for him, but that was at a different point in time. Now he's rounded off in the stomach, unable to crunch down fully to showcase those great abs, and with the waist growing, the quads look even more out of place. Martin certainly wins the quads portion of this pose just simply on the fact that he has legs that match his upper body. But his legs are also just a lot bigger than Nick's, and Martin has some feathering present as well. And the abs is another no-brainer. Nick's used to have the same qualities as Martin, very bubbly, separated, and the waistline used to be at least passable. Martin has the better taper by far now. Nick doesn't even have upper body taper to speak of. Martin's waist is smaller and his abs are a lot better on every metric compared to what Nick can muster up nowadays. If this was the 2023 Arnold Classic Nick, I would seriously consider making this a win for him. That's how much I used to like Nick's abs and thighs pose. Here, I just don't. It's a massive fall off. I know Martin's abs have the split, sure, and he's pushing that lower stomach out too much, and it's slightly rounded in the lower portion. But this is nothing short of a resounding win for Martin on top of a clear loss for Nick. At the same time, Martin is both excelling and Nick is flailing. So we can finally break away from the streak of 1-point wins, going all the way up to 3 points for Martin. We've made it to the last pose of the comparison and we're ending on a high note. Nick is one of the most muscular guys pound for pound on the planet, and Martin brings a ton of thickness too, but a lot of detail. And the legs, I don't find Nick's as bad because his waist is being hidden with his hands. They're good when you don't have to compare them to a wide waist. It's really hard to say they're worse than Martin's too because they're doing something different. Both are pretty good here. Martin definitely wins in the midsection though. I don't really think I need to go into that again. And the arms and delts, I like Nick's more for his pose, but Martin is very thick in the arms and more detailed in the delts. One of the only true objective wins here is the chest. Nick's delts are literally better than his pecs, and Martin has a gnarly looking chest with infinitely more detail than Nick. So I think a lot of it comes down to just what you like more on this one. I kind of think the objective winner here is Martin. He's less muscular than Nick, but not by much, and he has a ton more detail in the upper body. I'm going to give the point to Nick, however. I'm going to side with him because it's close regardless, but I think true mass monster fans will want him to win this one, so why not? He's already done pretty poorly in the mandatory, so here's a pity point to round out this area of judging. We're moving to the second round of judging now, the overall physique categories. We're using the same scoring system but now judging on 4 categories that encompass the whole physique: conditioning, shape, muscularity, and flaws. A couple of these are pretty close, but there are definitely a couple that aren't. I don't think I need to tell you who has better shape. I'm holding off on giving Martin the full 3 points because they still look like bodybuilders even though Martin has much better shape. If this were Andrew or Samson versus Nick, there's no doubt that this would be a slam dunk 3-point win for either of those guys, because they're just a different breed of aesthetic bodybuilders. Martin is more of a bodybuilder with aesthetics, not the other way around. I'm trying to be nice here too, since Nick will also have these issues weighing him down in the next category, so let's just go with 2 points here. And for that next category, it's going to be a 2-point win for Martin in flaws. This to me is a safe 2 points. Martin did have a major flaw in the way he hit some of the poses, but Nick has that big stomach and that awkward structure. Overall, with the 2-point wins in this category and shape for Martin, Nick loses 4 points because of all of his issues. So if you think I'm going too soft on Nick, I would disagree. Let's move on to the closest 2 categories. Conditioning is one of these, and overall I really could go either way. Martin has more detail from the front and the upper body, and in the lower body from the rear. But Nick had the thinner skin in the back and in the legs, and Martin had that film of water in the back like he usually does. If you really averaged everything together, I think it would pretty much be a tie, but Nick had that grainier look more consistently in more poses, and he was a bit drier overall, so let's give him a small 1-point win. Then in muscularity, it's the same deal. If you averaged up all these guys' pound for pound muscularity and completeness, you'd probably get a similar score. I am once again going to give the benefit of the doubt to Nick though, just slightly. However, I do think this will probably change the next time these guys step on stage. Nick is looking maxed out, he's about as muscular as he can possibly get, and Martin still has room to grow and not throw off his lines. I'm going to give Nick a 1-pointer now, as this may be one of the last times he gets it. Alright, let's remind ourselves why we did this comparison in the first place. We were asking 2 questions. Does Martin beat Nick now, and where would Nick place at the Olympia? Well, last time these two faced off at the 2024 New York Pro, I had Nick narrowly winning. But I have to be honest, while Martin was not as good as he is now, I think I was smoking crack by the looks of the scorecard. Honestly, looking back on it, I think Nick probably should have lost, or at least won by a lot smaller margin than what I had. But like I said, Martin was not as good then as he is now. He had the opportunity to improve and compete in this comparison and other shows, shows with new and improved versions. Nick hasn't competed since the New York Pro, so we just have to roll with this one. But yes, Martin still did get better from the 2024 New York Pro, and it was already close then. I think you can see what I'm hinting at. Winning this comparison with 69 points was Martin Fitzwater to Nick Walker's 31. Now let me preface that with another disclaimer. Yes, Martin has been able to improve, but also as far as the scoring is concerned, this one is a little artificially inflated for Martin because there were less points to go around. All but one pose was worth a 1-point win, and Martin won that one pose bigly, so he's a little further ahead of Nick than where he should be. But here's the bottom line. Right now, Nick Walker is in trouble. Let's leave the political discussions at the door. He skipped 2 Olympias now, and that probably hurts him, but let's only talk about the physiques right now. Nick is no longer really equipped to handle the top 3 like he used to be, let alone Martin, who is 4th. Nick has always had that awkward structure, but even then, the waistline was smaller, and the stomach was too. He has always had that wide waist genetically, but it's bigger now, and he's just kind of letting it fly a little too much. I love Nick Walker, by the way, and I'm a huge fan of his earlier physiques, so take it from a fan, now that he has even worse shape, he's not going to place top 3 with his current trajectory. Look who's winning the Olympia right now. Samson Dauda. Look who occupies the top 5. All guys that have much better shape than Nick Walker. Martin basically just does what Nick does in conditioning and muscularity, but since he doesn't have the big gut and has a much better structure and shape, he's going to place ahead of Nick if Nick doesn't course correct. Now there is good news for Nick. He is Nick Walker. He has always been able to put his head down and work. His mentality is unmatched. But if he doesn't do that, or if he's unable to do that, and if he keeps bringing something similar to the 2024 New York Pro, he's probably cooked as far as the top 3 is concerned. Maybe even the top 5. If shape really is the most important thing nowadays, which it seems to be, it won't just be Martin beating him. If they can pull it together, it may be guys like Andrew Jacked, Raphael, any other guy with shape that is okay in muscularity and conditioning. Nick used to be able to get by on being undeniable in mass and conditioning, and his shape wasn't as bad, so he basically had 2 pillars of this equation locked up, even though he lost the 3rd one. And with those first 2 pillars, mass and condition, he was able to win a lot of mandatories. However, now the game is being changed. Martin almost beat him in New York. Why? I've said this before, Martin could have beat Nick, but he wasn't quite ready himself. But it was still just a 2-point victory for Nick, which is as close as it could be. In my opinion, this was basically a message to Nick. Basically, the IFBB told him he has things to fix, or he's going to get passed up. And Martin has improved since New York. At the Olympia, he was even more conditioned and dry, and also a little bit bigger, which cuts into Nick's prime territories. Why not just go with Martin over Nick? He's just as muscular, complete, and conditioned as Nick, but also has better shape and none of Nick's major flaws. At this point, Nick is just not going to beat Martin again. It's technically subject to change if Nick can pull off something like Rolly Winkler did, but Martin is also improving at the same time. He's going to get bigger, he's going to get more maturity, and thinner skin in the back, and his shape will always be better than Nick's. And on top of all of this, the head judge of the major events is saying that we want shape and Nick doesn't have it. We'll see what happens. Anything can happen. But as for today, in my opinion, Martin Fitzwater would have beaten Nick at the 2024 Mr. Olympia. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. What did you guys think of this one? Do you think Martin would have won, or do you think Nick would have gotten the win like in New York this year? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you like these types of videos, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you want to support the channel even further, be sure to head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. With all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Get Alexia.